And the pandemic, we know, has been so punishing for many industries, but perhaps none more so than the arts. But now theatre lovers are finally allowed to fill the stalls again. And my guest on tonight's Big Question is making sure one of the nation's most iconic venue raises the curtains in style. Musical theatre icon and Olivier Award winner Ruthie Henshall is directing and starring in the first post-Freedom Day West End production at the Royal Albert Hall. The best of the West End is backed by the great Dame Judi Dench, patron of the charity Acting for Others, who will benefit from ticket sales of the musical extravaganza on July the 21st. Now, Ruthie, of course, you know, one of our best-loved names in theatre, after making her West End debut in a little show called Cats in 1987, she landed the role every actress dreamed of, many actually roles every actress dreamed of. Nancy in Oliver, Miss Wilkinson in Billy Elliot, and both Roxy and Velma in Chicago, which saw her whisked off to Broadway. But after decades of moving audiences, Ruthie touched hearts recently by sharing her personal experience with lockdown care home restrictions. After being unable to visit her 87-year-old mother Gloria for 6 months before her death, she led a delegation to Downing Street to deliver a 250,000 name petition calling for a more compassionate approach. So, from dining with the Queen in Buckingham Palace when she dated Prince Edward to being covered in gunge in a freezing Welsh castle and I'm a Celebrity last year, Ruthie has really lived quite a life, and it is a pleasure to have you on the Big Question tonight, Ruthie Henshall.
Thank you for having me.
Firstly, look, I have to talk to you about the story of your mum. It touched me so greatly. So many people were going through this, and I think you absolutely crystallised the feeling that many people had. My great-auntie died in a care home over the crisis too. We were unable to see her for months and months before her death. And the thing that I thought was so cruel was the fact that because she was suffering from dementia, even though she died with COVID, you know, she died of dementia.
Yeah.
And she didn't know why we weren't there for her. She had no idea why she was unable to see her family for those final months. And I just think the cruelty and what people have been put through in terms of the lack of care home visits over the past year is really unforgivable.
Well, what's unforgivable is that it's still going on.
I know.
That there are still people who are only being given a 30-minute visit per week to see their loved ones. And if we go into lockdown again, because it's not in law, because the guidance is to have an essential caregiver, which I became for my mother. So I could go in there any time, any day, lateral flow test, PPE, all of that, and double vaccinated. And I could go in and look after her and touch her and be with her and love on her. Now, I do think, I know this is... my mother, before lockdown, she was walking, she was talking, she was feeding herself. You could have conversations with her. 4 months later, and she'd been in her room on her own for that entire time. Somebody just coming, a carer every so often coming in and out. And she 4 months later, she wasn't walking, she wasn't talking, she was being fed with food being mushed up. And I feel like, I fought and fought and fought to get in. And I finally got in when the government gave this guidance, which many of the homes were not taking, are still not taking. So what happens if we get locked down again? You know, we all have a choice, they don't. And I was incensed by the fact that, and I'm still very, very cross, that's a really polite way of putting it, that it's still not been enshrined in law, because it has to be. Where are their rights? My mother, I got in to see her as an essential caregiver, and 5 weeks later she died. And one of my sisters was still having window visits, just standing outside the window, and I would sit in with my mother and, you know, sort of try and decipher what Susan was saying outside the window to my mother. But it was cruelty to the utmost, because my mother had nothing left but her family. She used to love her food. It's all mushed up again. When I cuddled her, when I finally got in to see her and I would hug her, she would just moan because she couldn't speak anymore. But there'd be this sort of, oh. She had no idea why we weren't there, because she can't remember. She couldn't remember every day. And so we'd stand at the window and say, "We're trying to get in, Mum, we're trying to get in." It was one of my sisters, Susan, she was very, very upset in the end, because she got to see my mother twice behind a screen before my mother died. And there was no reason for that. There was no need for that. We had the lateral flow tests. We had, PPE, double vaccination. There were so many things,
layers of protection.
And risk assessment. And I think what's happening is these poor people in these homes are just being left because they don't have a voice, and families are being denied visits, and it's all because, and I've had it up to here with the government saying guidance, stop doing that. You've got to, make it law, or nothing will change.
Because that's the issue, isn't it? From Monday, it is all down to the care homes.
Yes.
To make their own decisions.
Still.
Yeah.
And they are literally, it's a postcode lottery.
Yeah, because the government is saying, look, you should be, in theory, free to visit care homes.
And everybody should have an essential caregiver if you are in a home. But what they're saying is, you can have an essential caregiver. This is if you fight for it with some of these homes, but only if their needs are great enough. Well, what happens to the needs of their mental health?
Yeah.
What's happening to these people who are dying of loneliness, of isolation, not being able to see their parents, not being able to see their children, and
just a lack of love.
And this is what I felt so angry about when my mother died, because they are keeping out anything that is wonderful from a home.
Yeah.
This still shouldn't be happening.
No.
If you go into a home, everything comes into an old people's home. The entertainment, the family, everything. They're not going out. So everything's coming in. But what's happening still is that they are social distancing all the residents, even the residents. So you've got some in that room, some in the conservatory, some over there. So there's not that hubbub in the main room, and there's no entertainment. They're just wandering the halls, and this is, look, there are some amazing carers. There were in my mother's home, and that's no reflection on them, but the people who are running these, because it's a business, they are literally making their own rules. This is criminal. It is criminal.
And so you will call on the government to actually enshrine in law rights for the family members of people in care homes?
Yes, I've been working with Rights for Residents, so if you need to know anything about Rights for Residents, then, go there. But we went to Parliament, we delivered a petition to say this has to be put in law, because otherwise, let's just, it's like, I don't know if I'm even allowed to say this, but it's like a crapshoot. Whether you can see your mum, whether you can not see your mum, whether that person can or that person can. At one point there's 3 of us girls, and only one was able to see my mother, same one each time, and that was going on until 2 weeks before my mother died.
Which is a sort of form of, it's like a cruel and unusual form of torture, isn't it, for your other sisters?
Not only was it cruel on my mother and her mental health, but for our mental health, standing at a window, it really gets to me, standing at a window and watching your mother basically dying from a window and not being able to get in was painful beyond. It was unbearable, because all all she wants is to be touched. Because when I got in there and when I touched her, there was a whole difference in her being. One of the carers and the manager said, "Oh my God, the difference in your mother in 2 days since you've been in here. You know, the lights are on in her eyes." And I wonder whether once we'd all got in to see her, it was time for her to let go, because she was a shell when I got in there of who we'd, seen the last time we'd seen her.
It's just heartbreaking. It is absolutely heartbreaking. But I think you sharing it is so important, even though it is really difficult, because these stories are going on for hundreds of folks on a daily basis who don't have your profile, and these people feel voiceless. I mean, I speak to them and communicate with them every day. I had the situation with my great auntie in the care home, so I just know how much this is harming people's lives. And also, the thing is, I understand with all of the restrictions that it's really difficult when it comes to big life events. And I think, for example, the restrictions on weddings and the theatre, which we're going to talk about soon, are so difficult. But you can't repeat an end-of-life situation. There's no other chance to say goodbye to your mother. There's no other chance to attend someone's funeral. And I think they must be prioritised.
Well, my mother, I noticed something was wrong on the Sunday. And so I came in on the Monday, even though I wasn't due to visit. I came in on the Monday and I knew something was wrong. And she died the following morning, early in the morning. That day was when she went. And I was able to... Otherwise, what would have happened was a carer would have come in every so often, thought my mum was asleep, and gone out again, because they thought she was tired that day. Because she, people with dementia, they go up and down. And I feel... My father died at the beginning of lockdown, the first lockdown, and then a year later my mother died. We haven't had a funeral for either.
At all?
At all. Because it wasn't... We weren't allowed to have... we buried my father, but there were 6 of us under an umbrella in the...
so cruel.
But with my... And with my mother, we've been waiting to do something, because we feel we're going to do a big memorial for both of them. So for my mum and my dad, we're going to have the biggest wahuli when we can have everybody there. Because my father was a journalist, my mother was a teacher, and there are so many people who want to pay their respects. And 30... when we were standing in the rain, and I know there are so many people who've had terrible things happen throughout this COVID, but when we were standing in the rain, 6 of us with the vicar putting my father's remains in the ground, I felt devastated, because I thought, this isn't befitting. This is just not...
of his life.
No. And so, we just kept waiting and waiting and thinking, well, it'll open up soon, it'll open up soon. And it didn't, and it didn't, and it didn't. And then my mother died. And so it was... We'll do a big wahuli. We'll do one that is absolutely fitting for both.
Yeah, no, there is something particularly dehumanising about a COVID funeral. There really is.
That wasn't going to be good enough.
No, absolutely not. And then, of course, Ruthie, I guess one of your other great loves, the theatre and the entertainment industry, has been brutalised by the government and the restrictions in another way.
Oh,
and
my goodness.
So many livelihoods have been lost.
Yes, huge amounts. I have a friend who, when we went into lockdown and, because we're self-employed, a lot of our business didn't qualify for the government grants.
So it's part of the excluded, the people who haven't necessarily received any support or money from the government, even though they've been completely unable to work now in some cases for 16 months.
That's exactly right. And this particular friend of mine, she was picking the fruit during the day. Her husband was boxing it up at night to go to the various superstores. And then when that season ended, they realised they needed something else. So they had £5,000 savings between them. They've got 3 children. They had £5,000 savings, so they bought a van. And that van meant that they could go and deliver parcels for, they used to get £1 a parcel. You work this out, how many you can write. £1 a parcel. And unfortunately, about 5 weeks into it, the van blew up.
Oh, no.
The poor fella got burnt. They then borrowed some money off friends to buy another van. So they now have no savings. When you think about the fact that it was really only the people who were in shows at the time that were getting furloughed.
Yeah, and I've heard stories of great opera singers and absolutely brilliant performers who have had to diversify and become delivery drivers in order simply to feed their family. And there's a lot of people in the arts and entertainment industry who really feel they've been overlooked. It's as if the industry doesn't matter. And of course it does matter so much because it's one of our biggest exports internationally.
Thank you, yes.
It means so much for our business and our brand. And when the Prime Minister constantly talks about global Britain, what do people think about? They think about our shows and our music and definitely our West End and our theatre.
Yeah.
So you're fighting to bring it back.
Yes, because if you think about it, the arts brings in, what is it, 9.7 billion? Football brings in 7.
That's fascinating, isn't it?
So let's just take a moment to look after our own, and also to not have, not mentioning any names, but we all know who it was, somebody saying, why don't you go and retrain? How insulting is that? How condescending is that? I have done what I've done since I was 11 years old. I've trained as a dancer, and we constantly have to keep in shape, keep a voice. It's like being an athlete. And we know we're lucky to do what we do. We're absolutely, thank you. But it really made me realise during COVID how much it is still not considered a proper job. I
know, which is nuts. It's absolutely nuts. I completely agree, because you can't do it from home.
No.
I mean, did you sympathise with Andrew Lloyd Webber when he suggested that he would even consider getting arrested in order for his theatres to open? And in the end, because he's a man of true morality, Andrew Lloyd Webber, actually. And in the end, the only reason he decided not to is because he took legal advice and he discovered that every single performer would also potentially be arrested, every single staff member at the theatre, the sound technicians, the lighting technicians, they would all be at risk of arrest too, which is why he didn't go through with it in the end.
Yeah, and I take my hat off to him, because I do believe if that wasn't a factor, he would have quite happily been locked up. But it wasn't to be. It would have really upset a whole industry, or a whole industry, a whole show of people. But what I see most brilliantly about all of this is the way that the theatre does stick together. All the producers stick together, actors. We all are looking out for each other. And this is why we're doing the show next week.
Because the Royal Albert Hall has been absolutely decimated financially as a result of this crisis too, and it's one of our great venues, so it's going to be amazing to see it full, right? Because it's allowed to be full. It's allowed to be full. Thank God.
And they've got, we have 120 in the orchestra. We've got 200 performers all in all, with the orchestra and with the performers. And it's called Best of the West End. And £5 from every ticket is going to Acting for Others.
Gosh, I wish I could be there.
Which is really, really, it is in need.
Look, we've got loads of questions for you pouring in, so we're going to have to do them quick fire, Ruthie. Alice on Twitter asks, do you think young people who have just left stage school should take the vaccine?
Yes.
Simple question. Excellent. With a simple answer. Joseph on GBNews said, please, from the bottom of my heart, thank Ruthie for all she has done regarding care homes during the pandemic, and let her know she is the best Roxy in Chicago ever. So I think that's more a statement rather than a question, but thank you for it, Joseph. Ryan on GBNews says, if you could go back, would you break the rules regarding care homes to have more time with your mum? But I wonder if that was even possible.
Oh, I tried.
Yeah.
You know, they're locked. You can't get in. So, you know, what was I to do? All I could do was try and bash on the doors and go to the government.
And Kevin on GBNews asks, would performing on stage, filmed with cameras, viewed live on YouTube, solve the audience problem?
Then it's not live, is it? That's what we all miss. We miss the fact that because there's an interaction that happens, it's a relationship, the audience and the people on stage, and it's just so sad. Because you feed off each other. It's a wonderful relationship. So no, I don't think it's the same.
No, it's not. It's not, because that's what we have TVs and videos for, isn't it?
That's right.
Alice on Twitter asks, if you could be in any production in the West End, now, I guess, which one would it be? Or is there one that you've hankered to be in and you haven't been able to?
Ooh, I don't know. I honestly can't say that there is one at the moment that I think, oh, I'm desperate to do that. But there will be certain roles in my life that if I don't play them by the time I'm 90, I will be, you know, everybody's got to do Rose's turn at some stage, you know, that kind of thing in Gypsy. And, I want to do something brand new as well. There is nothing more wonderful than creating the blueprint of a new show.
And especially seeing there's been so many amazing new shows coming out recently, from Hamilton to Dear Evan Hansen. You know, it's an exciting time for musical theatre. Final question for me before the break. And I know this is probably an impossible question, but what would you say is your favourite role? Which character do you associate most with?
I will always have, and it's a long time ago now, but I will always have Crazy for You, Polly and Crazy for You at the top of my list. And then sort of close second and third is Les Mis, Fontaine, and then Chicago, because they are just the best female roles. But then you go, Nancy, oh my God, you know.
But I guess The Phantom was just so game-changing at the time, wasn't it? So you've got to have it in there. You've got to have it in there. Well, Ruthie, I had to ask you about a story in the news this week. Prince Edward, who you may know a little bit. Prince Charles, it looks like, is saying that he's not going to be passed down the dukedom, so he won't become the Duke of Edinburgh if Prince Charles gets his way. And of course it was actually the wish of Prince Philip and the Queen, and this was all publicly announced on his wedding day, that he was going to become the Duke of Edinburgh. I'm really opposed to Charles reversing the decision. How do you feel about it?
I don't know enough about it, to be quite honest. Honestly, it's a subject that I like to stay out of.
That's fair enough. That's absolutely fair enough. Tell me, though, what was dinner with the Queen like?
Gorgeous. And I'll tell you why. Because, of course, she knows how to talk to anyone and everyone. Yeah. And she instantly would talk to me about the theatre, really, really welcoming, would you believe? I know that sounds really nuts, but whenever I was with them... That's just what I want to hear. But honestly, whenever I was with them, it was like being with a family. In the back of your mind, of course, you're going, oh, it's the royal family, but they behave like a very loving family when they're together, as much as, you know, there's craziness that, you know, that we read in the papers. They love each other.
I love to hear that. Now, look, our superstar panel with us as well. They are journalist and author Rebecca Reed, comedian and trigonometry podcast host Constantine Kisson, and GBNews presenter, the host of Free Speech Nation, Andrew Doyle. Rebecca, do you have a question for Ruthie?
I'm going to have to do a bit of a theatre geek fangirl. Can I ask a two-part question? Can my first part be, what's your favourite role you've ever done? And if the theatres ever get to reopen properly, what would you say needs a revival most of all for the West End?
Gosh, they're big questions. We were just talking earlier about the fact that, favourite roles, Crazy for You, Fontaine in Les Mis and Chicago, that they're at the top, but everything else is fairly, squidging just underneath. But what needs to be revived? Wow, there is a lot that needs to be revived. But I'm just happy to see that we're going to have full capacity soon, because it is one of the most depressing things is to go into a theatre, which I have, that's half full, and suddenly everyone's a lot more timid, and there's air everywhere, and you've got a mask on, and suddenly you're not in it anymore.
Totally agree. I would like to see Jesus Christ Superstar revived, actually.
Oh, I love
think
Jesus
it's time
Great
for
choice.
it to be back on the West End. Not that you asked me, Rebecca, but just throwing my 2 pennies worth.
I always care.
Constantine Kirsten, do you have a question for Ruth?
Well, yeah, a lot of the performing arts, you alluded to just earlier, a lot of the performing arts, comedy clubs, etc., have suffered as well. Do you think the West End will make a full recovery?
Yes, I do. And I think because I think from all through COVID, what's happened is people have realised quite how much live theatre, how important it is. We were also talking earlier about the fact that, when COVID came along, I realised that it's still not considered a proper job. But there is, it's an incredible experience, a live experience, and I think we've all been, it's been such a, we've all been so lonely. So I do think people want to get back out there again. I mean, when they opened up the cinemas, I was there first night.
Me too. I'm so desperate. I bought all my theatre tickets already. I'm like, I want to support this industry, because really this sounds dramatic. I completely agree with you, Ruthie. I think it will survive, but this is life or death at the moment. So this is the time, if you can afford to, because I obviously know some people have been hurt so badly by the pandemic, but for others who've actually saved a lot of money, and there's a lot of studies that say lots of us have been saving up because we haven't been able to do things. It's like, this is the time to buy a theatre ticket. It really is.
Because the theatre has definitely suffered. The people in it, I know comedians, every area of the arts has been absolutely decimated by this. So I'm hoping that people just want to get out there again and see it. But I do also know that there are a few theatres, not West End necessarily, but there are a few theatres that haven't survived this and won't ever come back.
Andrew Doyle, your question for Ruthie.
I just wanted to ask about your solo show, when that's going on and what it's going to be about.
Oh, this is great.
Oh, you see, it's called In My Life, and I'm going round. It's in October. If you ask me the dates, then I'm just at a loss, because they push me there and tell me when to go on, and I'm there. But, it's Dublin, Leicester, Manchester, Cadogan Hall in London, and it's a solo tour with. If you like a bit of musical theatre, then and stories, of course, lots of stories.
Now, look, it would be remiss of me not to ask about I'm a Celebrity. Get me out of here, Ruthie, because, I mean, for me, I just imagine you must have been gutted, because usually, OK, you're starving, but at least you're in the Australian heat. And last year it was transported to what looked like, honestly, the most miserable, freezing cold castle in Wales.
Yeah.
Was it as bad as it looked?
It absolutely was. Let me tell you what I thought I was going into. What I thought was that if you really get very, very hungry, somebody's going to slip you a protein bar, or
They're not going to let you starve.
They're not. Well, what you see is what is happening. And I can't tell you how many times I stood in that front room, or that cavern, and shouted, "Please, somebody turn on some heat!" Because it was freezing in there.
Oh.
And I mean, an amazing experience, but it really was brutal. And I swear, we all lost our minds at some point, and I swear I was coming down off sugar, off caffeine, but we'd had 2 weeks before we actually went into the castle of quarantine. So, and I had 10 days because I went in later. Yeah, completely on your own. And I also, for 9 days, had no phone, no computer.
Before you were in there?
Before we went in there.
Why? Was that your choice?
No. They took everything from us.
They took your phone away?
Yes.
Before you were even in there?
Yes. Because I especially once they'd all gone in as well, but we weren't allowed to see anything that was being aired on it.
Because you arrived a few days late?
Yeah. But everybody's phone was taken off them a week before. As soon as they announced who was going in, they took their phones. And then I had a few extra days, so I had 9 days with Netflix only, which I really have seen everything now. But and so by the time you get in there, I felt nuts. But the strangest thing was that after that lockdown of 2 weeks and then going in there, we were a really tight group, and I think that part of that was because we'd been on our own for 2 weeks and it was so lovely to see people. But the other thing, the weirdest sensation was coming out, having been able to cuddle and almost lose track of days, COVID, everything. And then they opened the doors for me to go out, and there was a sea of masks and people going, sorry, I can't touch you, but well done, sorry, if you could just... And it was the weirdest.
And all you wanted to do was hug someone, probably, see someone's face.
Yes, but mind you, I don't know if you saw my face, I skipped out of there. It was cold, I was starving hungry. When they called my name,
You were relieved.
I was.
Well, I mean, it's looking increasingly unlikely they're going to be able to go back to Australia this year.
Oh, does it?
They've got the zero COVID policy in Australia at the moment, and
Okay.
I just think it's going to be impossible. So, unfortunately, I think we're not going to have any camp mates this year.
Oh,
it's going to be
Cledwyn
castle
will be
mates in the
back.
winter.
Oh, honestly, I think it is probably harder than being in the jungle. If I could have been in a hammock under the sun chatting away, I think it would have been slightly easier.
Indeed.